good morning. If it's good morning for you, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. This is a Friday takeaway. My name is Karl Monahan. I am the owner of the Pelvic Pain Clinic, dedicated solely to the treatment of male pelvic pain conditions, and founder member of Pelvic Pain Matters, educating patients and therapists alike in pelvic pain. So, episode 37 of the Pelvic Pain Matters podcast. This is a Friday takeaway. These are snippets of information, shorter podcasts that I delve into various subjects and topics that come up for me in the clinic. And this week I am talking about pelvic floor dysfunction. But I'm also going to label it pelvic floor dysfunction and cultured meat or lab-born meat. Interesting concept, but this will make more sense in just a moment. Well, let's look at first of all what pelvic floor dysfunction is and why I'm comparing it to laboratory grown meat. Under the normal header of what pelvic floor dysfunction is often referred or related to. So, pelvic floor dysfunction depend the symptoms of pelvic floor dysfunction, I should say, depend on whether you are a male or a female. For our purposes, we'll be covering male pelvic pain today, and therefore male pelvic pain dysfunction. Um, so. Um, Typically, male pelvic floor dysfunction will include a variety of symptoms, that may include problems with defecation, that's having bowel movements. It may include problems around urinary function, whether that's poor flow, weak stream, stop-start flow. And need to go pretty soon afterwards. That can all be classified under pelvic floor dysfunction, or erectile dysfunction. So that's changes to erections, and an ability to achieve or maintain an erection. It's pretty broad and varied, really, isn't it? And we'll unpack that a little bit more in just a moment. I want you to draw in your mind's eye, or if you have a pen and paper, draw the figure 8. Draw the number 8. So one circle sitting on top of another circle. And then in that, in fact, let me draw you one here. So if you're watching this on YouTube, I am now going to draw the figure 8 for you and then put 2 circles in that. So this is my figure 8. Oh, okay, that's not going to happen. I just realized I'm on a different background. So anyway, a figure 8. One circle on top of another circle, and then within each of those circles, draw 2 more circles. So in the top circle, there'll be a smaller circle in it, and in the bottom circle, there'll be another circle in that as well. All right, that is what the pelvic floor looks like. It's a figure of 8. And the circle at the top with the smaller circle inside it is the front of the pelvic floor. And the bottom circle with another circle in it is the back of the pelvic floor. The front and top circle is at the front, like I said, and the small circle in it is the urethra. Okay, that's where we urinate through. And the bottom circle with the smaller circle in it is the rectum, and that's where we defecate through as well. Often the pelvic floor is described as a bit of a sling or a hammock, but that does it so much. It just doesn't do it service. It really, really doesn't. It's an injustice to how mobile and agile and really, really important the pelvic floor is. It's more like a tongue. If you think of the ability to make shapes that your tongue has, the ability to mold itself and adapt and move and create the words that you are hearing that are coming from my mouth, for example, as well as a whole bunch of other sounds, that's probably a closer comparison to what the pelvic floor is able to do. It doesn't just turn on and turn off. It doesn't just clench and relax. You can clench it at the front alone, and you can clench it at the back alone, but then you can clench it together. And then depending on your posture, standing, sitting, lying, and your leg position, and the activity that you're doing, at that moment in time. So for me, I think of like a kneeling lunge. So if you imagine the proposal position, all right, one knee forwards, bent with your foot on the floor, and the other knee bent behind you with the knee on the floor, and now do that pelvic floor contraction. It has to have the ability to adapt and to shift and to change depending on how you're loading yourself up. So the pelvic floor is beautiful. It is such a powerhouse of the human body. It's really integral to movements that happen above the waist and also really integral to movements that happen beneath the waist. It's really integral around digestion and elimination. It provides support. It allows us to do so many things, but it can be dysfunctional. Let me read you out a description from a National Institute of Health journal. The title of the title of the article is called Pelvic Floor Dysfunction, and this was from June 26, 2023. So, pelvic floor dysfunction refers to a broad constellation of symptoms and anatomic changes related to abnormal function of the pelvic floor musculature. The discorded function corresponds to either increased activity, also known as hypertonicity, or diminished activity, hypotonicity, or inappropriate coordination of the pelvic floor muscles. So there it is. There is a brief description. That article was written by W.R. Grimes and Michael Stratton. But here is my big issue with most of the descriptions of pelvic floor dysfunction. It refers to muscles. And yes, the pelvic floor is made up of muscles. Um, but if we only consider the muscles in this, we're missing out actually on what else is going on. And I think this is really, really limiting. As as a description, pelvic floor dysfunction doesn't really describe much. It just says there's something going wrong within the pelvic floor. It doesn't describe anything more than that. And we have to knuckle down a little bit deeper and really find out what part of the pelvic floor that is describing, and what the functional change is to really get a deeper understanding. So pelvic floor dysfunction presenting with erectile dysfunction, urinary dysfunction, bowel dysfunction. So it's an overarching term, it's an umbrella term. It doesn't say very, very much, but often it's now becoming more commonly used to describe, interesting, or highlight what is happening within the pelvis. But I have a real issue with this. It doesn't tell us anything, and it so misses out everything else that contributes to that pelvic floor, which is why I describe it a little bit like laboratory-born meat or cultured meat. So why is that, Carl? I hear you asking. Good question. Thank you for asking. So cultivated meat is meat that's produced using animal cells in a laboratory, using tissue engineering techniques pioneered in regenerative medicine. And the first hamburger that was made by cultured meats was presented in London in August 5th, 2013. So 11 years ago now, quite a long time ago. But what essentially happens is that you take the cells of an animal, and I have a patient, PhD patient, who grows lab meat. He was part of a new research program last year that started to develop more and more opportunities for growing meat, and how you feed that meat cell as well, interestingly. So you take meat cells from different animals, and depending on what meat you want to produce, then you start to take those individual cells and you start to feed them with, often it's grass feed, liquid grass feed, because that's what the cells thrive on. And you start getting this meat born in a laboratory. Vat-grown meat, lab-grown meat, cell-based meat, clean meat, cultivated meat, synthetic meat, in vitro meat, slaughter-free meat, healthy meat. They're all other terms that come along with this. So why am I comparing pelvic floor dysfunction with lab-born meat? Well, it's not seeing the bigger picture, right? The pelvic floor doesn't work in isolation. And what I'm going to set you as a bit of a challenge for today, as I start to wrap up today's podcast, is I want you to tell me, I want you to contact me either at pelvicpainmatters@gmail.com or respond in the comment section, depending on which platform that you're watching this on or listening to it on. But I want you to help me and everyone else unpack what pelvic floor dysfunction actually is. So I want you to tell me what other structures um, or systems in the body that also contribute to pelvic floor. The pelvic floor just doesn't sit in isolation, right? It's not floating in space. It's not floating in a lab like lab-born meat is without the structure of the animal around it. The pelvic floor is part of an integrated model. And unless we see the integrated model, we don't fully understand what pelvic floor dysfunction is. And much of my issue around this is that the current techniques and treatments for pelvic floor dysfunction are purely muscular based. Let's stretch the muscles. Let's strengthen the muscles. Let's do myofascial trigger point release on the muscles in the pelvic floor. And then once we've done that, then the patient will overcome their symptoms. For me, that's really reductionist. It doesn't look at the whole picture. It misses out on so many opportunities for patients to overcome their symptoms. And the number of patients, it's interesting now, I'm seeing an increase in the number of patients that are contacting me saying, I've got pelvic floor dysfunction. Can you do this treatment on me? And I need to take a little bit more time explaining why it's really important we look beyond the muscles and beyond trigger points and beyond stretching a tight, in inverted commas, muscle. So there's my little challenge for you for this week. Contact me at pelvicpainmatters@gmail.com or respond to YouTube or Spotify or Podbeam or Apple Music or wherever you are currently listening to this on. And I want you to tell me, in your opinion, what else do you think will be contributing to the muscles in pelvic floor dysfunction for them to become dysfunctional? All right, let's open up this conversation. The pelvic floor does not sit in isolation. It does not rest in open space. Understanding that really, really is the key moving further forwards as to how we can treat this more successfully. This is the start of, as you can probably tell now, a couple of episodes of my podcast, of the Pelvic Pain Natters podcast on pelvic floor dysfunction. It's not lab-born meat. It isn't born in isolation. It doesn't sit separate from the rest of the animal like lab-born meat does. So let's consider this as a whole, as an integrated model. Come back to me. I look forward to hearing some of your answers and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your inputs. This is Friday Takeaway. My name's Karl Monahan. I look forward to the next Friday Takeaway where we get to unpack pelvic floor dysfunction a little bit more. Until next time.